right, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to start up the second half of today. Starting off the conversation is Evan Smith and Eric Guthrie discussing smart contracts.
All right, welcome back from lunch. Everyone had a good lunch? Excellent. So the question I'll ask again to start off this smart contract conversation is, how many of you in this room are lawyers right now? Got one, two, okay.
Some lawyers.
Huh?
We got some lawyers.
Yeah, we got some lawyers, you know. So, okay, so this session, like I promised in my overview session, is about smart contracts, which is really huge in the legal community because this is really one of the engines that drives, blockchain technology and DAOs and interfacing with each other in terms of what we're trying to do with, offering acceptance and with, selling products and services. So this is the vehicle that we really need to focus on to be able to make sure our clients know what they're doing. So this is kind of broken down into two sections. Evan's going to take the first part. I'm going to take the second part, and when they come together, we're going to ask Q&A. So I'm going to pass it on to Evan, and then we can go from there.
Okay. Great. So let's see if this works. Awesome. So first, we're going to start with the basics. And first question is, what is a smart contract? And a definition for smart contract that I think people would accept is program distributed across a blockchain that takes actions when predetermined conditions are met. What a smart contract does is automates the execution of some function or agreement. You get a certain outcome. Whatever it's programmed to do is exactly what it does. There's no intermediaries. Nobody has to, be involved or push a button or anything to make it happen. And it happens very quickly once it's executed. Are smart contracts really smart? Well, sort of. I mean, they're smarter than a piece of paper, which is the traditional way of doing contracts. There's no actual intelligence or artificial intelligence involved in smart contracts. They're basically pretty simple programs, and they do exactly what they're supposed to do. I think people have, when you hear smart contracts, you have this vision maybe of a whole world where your leases and your business deals and all the the contracts that you may get involved in every day or every month, that those might be all put on the blockchain and automated and made much more efficient and less expensive, and that's a great vision. It is not really where we are today. Where we are today is sort of at the early stages, I think, of the development of smart contracts. And as we're going to see, there's plenty of room for building on what's been done and continuing to improve that process. So the first thing to understand is that a smart contract is a program that runs on a specific blockchain platform. So in order to implement a smart contract, first you have to pick a blockchain. There is lots of competition in the blockchain world in terms of platforms for smart contracts. And these are, Ethereum is the 800-pound gorilla and the sort of the first big one to get in the business and do that. Polkadot, Cardano, Avalanche, Binance, Cadena, and dozens of others. These are all places where you could implement a smart contract program. Each of these blockchains supports specific languages. And it's a programming language much like other programming languages that you may have seen if you've ever done any coding or you have friends or kids that do coding. It's going to look kind of familiar. Let's look at a simple example so we can kind of understand what program code looks like and what a smart contract might be or seem like. The example is a smart contract that manages a cryptocurrency wallet. So if you have a wallet on Ethereum, you could make a smart contract and have that manage your wallet instead of using the private key. And the basic functions of this program that we're going to look at, anybody can deposit money into your wallet, and nobody can withdraw money from your wallet unless they're you. So only the owner can withdraw. You know, this is a really rudimentary contract. I mean, it's almost so rudimentary that you might not consider this a legal contract in the traditional sense of legal contracts, but this is within the category of what people call smart contracts in this space. It's really, a smart contract is any program that's executed that does something for you when certain conditions are met. You can get more complicated, and people will get more complicated over time. You know, for example, this basic wallet that we're going to look at, you could add functions to this. You could have multi-signature transactions, have, you know, multiple owners that all have to approve it in order for money to come out or coin to come out. Daily transfer limits, emergency account freezing, more secure recovery. You know, you could write lots of code and do lots of programming for this thing to make it more functional. But here's a very simple piece of sample code. And this is that basic function. It's like you can put money in and you can take money out, but if you're not the owner, then the transaction fails. So gives you an idea of sort of how these things are implemented, and also gives you an idea of how difficult it might be to understand what the contract is supposed to do unless you happen to be familiar with software code. You know, so there's some people in the room, I'm sure, that can read this, and some people that will look at this and say, I really don't understand that. It doesn't speak to me. Functions that you can put in smart contracts. You can get inputs and confirmations. Something was delivered. So, you know, somebody puts in information like multiple owners all approve the release of funds. So those are inputs. You can report events and other information. The smart contract can send out notices of certain things happening or of it self-executing. It can do calculations. It can respond in different ways to conditions that exist. If this happened, then do this. You can transfer value, and that's really what most smart contracts, I think, write, as of today and this year. Most smart contracts are sort of built to do some sort of a value transfer under certain conditions, make a payment. So what can you do with all of these functions? Well, lots of things. I mean, ultimately, you could build a really complicated contract out of this. And people are working on or have worked on doing various kinds of financial transactions that are automated, elections, locking up patient data, real estate, securities law, insurance. There's no limit to the applications that you could find for these if you sort of build them up and make them more complicated and interesting. The way that a smart contract actually gets implemented or executed, first of all, you have to write code. There has to be a piece of code like the one we looked at a little while ago that tells you what's going to happen. It has to be posted on the blockchain. Some blockchains have the whole contract code posted. Other blockchains post the contract code offline, but store a hash or a digital fingerprint, basically, of that file so you can verify that it hasn't been tampered with. Then, when you're ready to execute, you put in the input that causes it to start running. And normally, on blockchains, you have to pay a transaction fee to get these contracts to execute. And you hear that referred to as gas. And the gas fee for executing a transaction or a contract varies significantly from blockchain to blockchain. That's one of the ways that the various blockchains compete with each other is to try to have a lower gas fee for each transaction. Another way they try to compete with each other is their ability to handle a huge volume of transactions. So there's lots of battling it out in that industry right now. I'm going to turn it over to Eric now, who's going to go through some of the basic legal issues that might be factors in smart contracts. And then we'll get back together and for the wrap-up and talk about some of the theories and ideas and maybe debate that a little bit. So,
Thanks, Evan. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Evan gave you a really good background to smart contracts, especially from the coding standpoint. And that's going to be really important because one of the main differences between a smart contract and a regular contract is the way it's written, right? And that is it's written in code, not in a language. That's important, and here's why. Code is more exact than a language. There's plenty of ambiguities, ways you can misinterpret, ways there's misunderstandings in any language. English, French, Thai, any other language you want to consider, right? There's much more ambiguity than the exactness in code, and that's quote unquote why it's called, like everyone was saying, smart contract, okay? But is it really a contract? So that's what we're going to discuss briefly in this session. I cover this in greater detail in the blockchain legal consulting, the legal specialist course, but we're going to kind of hit on it and then go to our Q&A. And then maybe take some great questions from all of you. Some of the key terms that we use when we're talking about actual contracts are offer and acceptance. Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier in my first presentation, but now we're going to just dive a little bit into it, right? You learn in law school that when you have a fully enforceable contract, you need what's called meeting of the minds. Okay, so I know you lawyers probably say, oh my God, that goes back to law school 101. Well, here we are again, right? Meeting of the minds is important. So the question is, does the if-then, and contracts, smart contracts are based on if-then statements. Does if-then replace offer acceptance? Does if-then replace meeting of the minds? I don't know. And why do I say that? It's because it could depend on the contract, on the smart contract, right? So that's one thing that has to be considered when you want to make a smart contract and want to make it as good as possible, right? You can write the code to be able to be more like a regular contract and pass the muster of state or federal law than just writing a smart contract, putting it on a blockchain like Evan was saying, and then going from there. So attaching it to a wallet also is makes it smart, right? After you finish an agreement and then both parties have done their part, someone's probably waiting for payment. And they're waiting for payment. And maybe they're still waiting for payment. But in a smart contract, boom, done, boom, wallet, Bob is your uncle, okay? So the process is far more streamlined, far more automated, and now it creates a system where how can we put the legal structure that exists into smart contracts and make it work on both sides, right? And that's where a good legal team can help you do that. So let's talk about some of the laws that apply to this. Now, when I was first reading about smart contracts, I was like, well, what about the statute of frauds? And I was like, I went deep, deep back, and I was like, man, I hadn't thought about that in a long time. Unless you're an attorney that practices commercial transaction law, you're not really looking at statute of frauds or UCC very often, right? So statute of frauds, that's basically states have their own set of statutes that basically define what is an enforceable contract that has to be in writing. We're not going to cover all those in detail, but there's a certain pecking order of things that have to be in the contract for it to be in writing or not in writing. For example, leases or dollar amounts or wills or marital issues. So some states have requirements for it to be in writing, some do not. But that's the statute of frauds. Then there's the Uniform Commercial Code. the UCC, as we call it, governs commercial transactions on the U.S. level, on the federal level, okay? So that's the code that basically says, this is what's required for a contract to be enforceable, right? So between the statute of frauds and the UCC, those are two of the areas of law that whoever is writing the smart contract or whoever is implementing it must be used in order to have a smart contract be legally enforceable. And like the last bullet point says, I already said it, it can vary from state to state. So knowing which state you need to do your work in as for blockchain technology or for a blockchain enterprise solution is very important. And then the next presentation, we're going to get into another reason why states are very important, but I don't want to give away that little tidbit just yet. So I mentioned offer and acceptance. So here are two very important ways that smart contracts have a difference between regular natural contracts and smart contracts, right? A regular contract is usually on paper, or it could be in a Word document or a PDF, what have you, but it's not in code, right? So the question is, does a contract in code, not in natural language, but in code, is that a contract? Okay? What do you guys think? Yes or no? No. Okay. So we got some conversation to have here. So we don't discuss it much in this section, but in my course we do. When you look at the language in the UCC and statute of frauds, it never says natural language. It says words like written in terms that can be agreed upon. It says stuff like clearly distinguished or clearly determined by the parties, right? So really the answer is probably yes. Code can be a language that can be used to have a smart contract, okay? Because it never said natural language. Here's question number 2. Does the acceptance of a smart contract, when you go on, you accept the smart contract for whatever terms or whatever performance is, the miners pay the gas fees and the whole thing is finalized, does that signature, does that acceptance equate to a signature for the smart contract? Wait. Okay, any no's? Okay, so the answer is yes, okay? A signature through the acceptance of the smart contract, in theory, does equate to the signature that you would do on a contract, okay? But that still hasn't resolved the initial issue whether or not there's actual offer and acceptance based on the initial creation of the contract. So the whole thing is premised upon that part being properly drafted and encoded, so you have a proper smart contract from the beginning to end. Is there? Okay, good. So I just covered the signature component. I'm getting ahead of myself. This is a wonderful topic for me. The e-sign act is the act that applies in this situation, okay? If you want to go out and read it, have fun. It's not exactly a page turner, but for attorneys it's very important because you want to make sure that you understand what are the requirements for the smart contract to be legally enforceable, and the e-sign act is electronic signature. What's more electronic than going online and accepting a smart contract in someone's blockchain, right? I mean, they didn't perceive this or consider it when they were creating, the e-sign act, but here we are, okay? And listen, the UETA is in 49 states. I forgot the state that doesn't have it, quite frankly. No, New York. It's not in the UETA. They have a similar law, but every state has a electronic signature law that all of you should know if you're practicing law in this field. If you have a blockchain enterprise solution and you're working on a smart contract, you may need to get a lawyer that can actually think this through for you. So, you know where to go. Just come to GBA. There's plenty of attorneys in that area, including the Cogent Law Group, for that type of information. So I mentioned some of the things already about the UCC. requirements that sale of goods for $500 more have to be in writing under Article 2, lease contracts, agreements that require a security interest. Those are just 3 examples of what's in Article 2. I kind of already said that earlier, so once again, the excitement is getting to me. But it says any type of intentional reduction into a tangible form is sufficient. That's what I was saying earlier about, not having to be in natural language. It's right there, a little, wordy for what I just said, but that's tangible reduction is sufficient, right? Those are the key words that make me and many other attorneys say that this means that code can be used as language for a smart contract. Statute of frauds, man, I just got ahead of myself all over the place, huh? Okay, so again, those are the bullet points here. We already covered the written agreement part, so I'm just gonna keep moving as soon as he's done taking that picture. You good? Okay. Amending or canceling smart contracts. Here's one of the fun parts. Everyone always says, once a smart contract is done, you can't amend it. What do you guys think? True or false? If you think it's true, raise your hand. So you think it's not true, raise your hand. Okay, hey, I'm not saying yes or no right now. Right now, we're still in the conversation stage. So the answer is yes, you can, but it's not as easy as just taking out your eraser or hitting your back delete button and retyping it in again. There's a few more steps that have to be taken, and it also depends on whether or not it's already been verified or not, right? So let's say you have a smart contract, and you put it on the blockchain, and you say, oh my God, I made a mistake on this smart contract. But it's already on the blockchain, you can't pull it back. So what do? Well, you could post a new contract on the blockchain to the same wallet with a higher gas fee, and the miners, they're not gonna take that contract, they're gonna take the new one, and the other one is probably gonna expire without having been completed by anyone accepting it. Right? That's one quick and easy way to do it without having to go back in and doing a whole bunch of, recoding and all that kind of stuff, right? So there are ways that you can amend/cancel a smart contract. You just need to have someone help you do it, because when I first started researching this years ago, I thought to myself, if it goes in a blockchain, if it can't be changed, if there's no way to go back in and rewrite the code, how do you change it? But a lot of clever folks came out with some great ideas on how to do it, and that's just one of them. So this is really important too. So I was thinking when I first got into smart contracts, I was like, what about the usual clauses we have in every one of our contracts? Alternate dispute resolution, acts of God, consumer protection. What if there's non-compliance? Is there any penalty clauses? With a smart contract, the if-then is just totally absolute in the basic smart contract context, right? So now we have companies, and we can do it ourselves if we do it, specifically for a client. We have companies that can create smart contracts with these clauses in it in the smart contracts, and now it's much more legally enforceable, and it looks and acts more like a regular contract than a smart contract. So you get the best of both worlds, right? I mean, you get the automatic, autonomous component of the smart contract, but you also get all the legal language and all the hundreds of years of contract law built into that particular platform. It's a win-win, right? So when you're looking to do smart contracts, everything that is on this list, in terms of whatever industry you're in, if you're in real estate, yeah, you could have tenant obligations. If it's for labor and employment or for employment contracts, you could have those kind of issues in there as well. Negligent and intentional acts for responsibility, that could be in there as well. Again, I mentioned alternate dispute resolution. And what's a big one? Jurisdiction. And I talked about it, and another presenter talked about it earlier on today. But if there is an issue with a smart contract, Where do you go for your ADR? Where do you go for enforcement? So, is it in the US? Is it in Taiwan? Is it in Bangkok? Is it in the UK? Is it in Canada? Is it in Australia? Who knows, right? But if you build that in, you take away all the complexities and the confusion about what happens if the smart contract is not completed in a successful or in a timely manner. Jumped ahead of myself again. For court enforcement, specify a jurisdiction or choice of law. For ADR, specify rules and location. Global virtual arbitration, especially in the world of COVID, that's entirely possible, right? You don't have to necessarily get on a plane and fly somewhere to, arbitrate your case. You can just get on Zoom or Teams or Google Hangout and do it if that is the method that the arbitrator allows. I think we're back together again. So I'm gonna pass this mic to you and get the other mic.
Okay, super.
Test. Okay.
Okay, so, we want to talk about, kind of some meta ideas around smart contracts and where they might be going in the future. Again, a lot of the implementations right now are kind of rudimentary, and a lot of these issues haven't really been figured out. So they have a tremendous value for transactional things and for payment processing, and there's all kinds of great applications for these, and that's still under development. So, in terms of strategic options on how to program one of these contracts, if it's a more complicated contract, you could have the terms that you can implement reasonably in code, and you could have some key legal terms in a natural language that are a supplement to the part that's coded and automatic. You could have terms implemented in code that are duplicated with natural language terms. So, if you're worried about in a complex transaction, you're worried about being able to enforce it in the sense that, the other side says, I never even understood what I was agreeing to because it was all in code and nobody explained it to me. You could provide a written explanation and take care of that problem. And another option that I think is reasonable is do the traditional contract in natural language like you've been doing it, but have a digital component. So, in a very complicated transaction, there may be things that you just can't code in, like whether tenants have met their obligations and whether they shoveled the sidewalks and maintained insurance and a million other things that they're supposed to do. But you could have a digital component for the things that you can digitize, like payments, and that could be sort of a hybrid approach. Could be a way to implement some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some one or two companies create smart contracts, but then the front-facing part of it is you just fill in the blanks. Name, address, employer, so on and so forth, and then that gets taken and gets put into the code, and then the smart contract is created. So, I haven't seen it for about a year or so, but I thought that was brilliant. Because what did I say earlier about what's going to make this technology effective and adopted? User interface, right? That is so critical. Every client I have, I tell them, if you have poor user interface, it's going to fail. And to what Evan was saying, right? So the code can be very complicated, but there's products out there that already exist that can make it simpler, or if you need to specialize, that's what we can do.
Jump to the next slide. Takeaways. You want to?
I'll start off. Yeah.
Start off?
So, like I was saying, during my section, This is really groundbreaking stuff, right? I mean, imagine to not have to worry about collections, dealing with intermediaries. Imagine having a process where you finish and then you get your money right away into your wallet, right? I mean, that's groundbreaking stuff. And imagine, now that crypto is in your wallet. Now you can do whatever with. You can reinvest into your company. I mean, everything becomes more streamlined in that process. Or imagine, I mean, I heard this idea last night. Brilliant idea. I think that, whoever is doing this, I'm not sure if I should say their name, but if they want to admit it outside, that's perfectly fine. A smart contract auditing company or auditing protocol. Because what's going to happen with if you're filing a lawsuit and you're saying to a judge, hey, listen, like Evan was saying, I didn't understand the code, right? And the judge says, well, show me the code. Do you think the average judge can read code? No. But what if there was an independent agency or company that says, hey, listen, we've been approved by the courts in these states to be able to interpret this code and provide a report on what it says and how it interacts? I think it's bloody brilliant. Yeah, so there's plenty opportunities out there to use this technology. You just have to know how to do it and create the user interface to make it effective.
I think that's right. I mean, there's tremendous opportunities here. This is a ground floor technology, and my analogy. I think I'm getting a slide ahead at this point, but some of us are old enough to remember Microsoft DOS. Okay.
You got one applause.
or you've been to the Smithsonian and you saw it operating. This was the first PC operating system, and there was no user interface at all except a command line. It would boot up and there'd be a little cursor there, and you had to type some kind of a command or tell it to run a particular program or copy a file or something. You had to write it out in text, what you wanted it to do. And if you got the syntax wrong, it wouldn't work. Building on that over the last 30 years or so, Microsoft is now at the point where we've got Windows 11. And it's a very capable operating system. It does lots of things, and it's easy to use, for anybody without computer training. But you couldn't sit down and you couldn't get a bunch of programmers and tell them to go write Microsoft 11 and expect it to happen, because that had to be built up over time. And and the programmers that are writing operating systems right now are standing on the shoulders of giants. They're improving what's been developed over 30 years. And that kind of development process is something that I think is going to happen with smart contracts. And people will come up with new ideas and new innovations and new concepts for how to write and implement a smart contract. And then somebody else will take that as a baseline and improve that. And eventually you'll get to as big a difference between current smart contracts and the future smart contracts as there is between the very first operating system for PCs and what we have now. That said, we're, I think, a long way from getting rid of lawyers and traditional contracts. We've talked a little bit about some of the obstacles to implementing those. And at the end of the day, there's an economic factor here. One of the things that I do in my practice is negotiate very complicated intellectual property licenses, in joint ventures and partnering agreements and worldwide distribution. Those are very specific usually to the parties and what they're trying to accomplish. So to implement that in a smart contract, it's a one-off. It's a very customized thing, and to go try to implement, code it and implement it in a smart contract, I'm not sure it makes sense to make that investment, at least not today. Maybe 20 years from now, when there's a whole bunch of modules that you could link together and build on that, that might make sense, but not right now.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I'll just add one more thing. In terms of the lawyers and the smart contract piece. Early on, I was discussing with a business owner about, the legalities of smart contracts, and their point, it was like, well, with this in place, it's gonna just ruin the need for lawyers, and not gonna need lawyers anymore. And I said, okay, let me ask you a question. When the internet came out, and then it was proliferated with, quickie divorce and quickie will and quickie this and quickie that, and all the forms of the hearing is went online and filled it out yourself and filed your own whatever. Did that get rid of the need for lawyers? No. We did not go away that easily, number one. And number two, as this is getting more complicated, the need for us actually is going to increase, okay? So don't think because there is a new contracting mechanism in place that it's going to replace the need for legal representation. It's not, okay?
Well, I would argue that on that issue that to some extent the advent of smart contracts requires more lawyering, but a little bit different kind of lawyering, because now we're asking lawyers to be an interface between coders and engineers and business people. So somebody's going to have to bridge that gap, because right now, in my view, what's the development of smart contracts technology is basically siloed. So you have lawyers thinking, oh, what can I do with this, and trying to figure that out and implement it. On the other hand, you have the people who are developing the blockchains that support smart contracts and the smart contract code and the programming languages who, as far as I know, none of them are lawyers. So it's being developed by geeks, and I proudly consider myself one of those. I'm an engineer. But that stuff is all being written and created and theorized by computer people and not by lawyers. So there's a real need, I think, to bridge those gaps. If we want this technology to be, if we want it to grow, if we want it to build, from DOS into Windows 11 and be really useful, then lawyers are going to have to get involved and bridge those failures of understanding about what's needed.
Agreed. So I think, are we ready for Q&A? What do you got next? A few more things, okay.
No, wait a minute. What happened? Oh, I think this is the last one.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so this is, I insisted on putting this slide in. Because I think in a scenario like the one we have here, where we're getting together and we're talking about the future and we're talking with government people and in terms of how to do some of this stuff, it probably pays to do some larger forward thinking. People are familiar with the Uniform Commercial Code. If you think about what the Uniform Commercial Code did for business transactions, it's a set of standardized rules, and you can contract out of them, but if you don't write anything down, and you go do a business deal, you go buy something at a store, it's covered by the UCC. So if there's no other contract, there's this standard set of terms that apply in standard ways that people are going to handle it. So my question is, why aren't some of the blockchain creators, some of the system developers, creating a blockchain smart contract code that's a set of standard rules that operate within their blockchain? And this isn't legislation. Yeah. Because you could get the U.S. or 5 other countries or 100 countries to pass some laws about this stuff, but that wouldn't really fix your problem, because you've got people all over the world and in an indeterminate place sometimes entering into these contracts. So the idea that a national government could solve this problem, I don't think so. But within a certain blockchain, who makes the rules for that blockchain? Who says how it works, how their token works, what the the people who created the blockchain. And those people could, if they wanted to, get with some lawyers and make a blockchain smart contract code, like the UCC, but within their blockchain. My other pie in the sky wish is for a smart contracts treaty. Now, as a intellectual property lawyer, one of my favorite things is the Patent Cooperation Treaty. There aren't many things that 140 countries around the world, basically every place that's important except China, can agree on. But the things about patent law that they could all agree on, they put in a treaty, and they built the World Intellectual Property Organization to kind of process applications and give corresponding rights to people in one country versus another country. There are probably some things like that about smart contracts that you could get 140 nations to agree that this is how this particular legal issue ought to be handled. One would be jurisdiction. So if you could get that kind of broad agreement, and again, this takes 20 years. It took a long time to come up with the Patent Cooperation Treaty and to get about every country in the world to sign on to it. But if you start now, and 20 years from now, you might just have that.
Yeah, that's a short period, right? 20 years, right? I don't have anything to add, so.
Can't be in a hurry.
No, exactly.
Should we take some questions?
Predictions?
We have another slide.
Yep.
Talk about it. I've been talking too much.
No, not at all. We really covered most of this stuff. I mean, it's at early phases. This is year what? Since 2008, since Bitcoin was, the white paper was published. So we're what, 13 years, into this. This is the very, 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 very beginning of a very long, productive, and I think very critical stage in technology and law. And to Evan's point, starting now with some of these groundbreaking ideas, especially for working together and creating a community, creating, systems of cooperation, I mean, it could happen. It's so critical, right? And it just starts with a group of people in one room or on Teams or on Zoom or what have you, saying, you know what, let's start this. And it could just grow from there with diligence and follow through, and with sheer determination, it can go, to a global phenomenon. So I think that could happen. The future of smart contracts, studying today's giants, yep, analogy, you already got that. So we're good. Next one. Q&A.
That's all there is.
I'm going to bring
Questions?
the mic down, and then you can do questions. No questions? Please come to the mic.
No, I'll just speak loud. Is there
We have an audience. The global audience wants to hear.
Hundreds of people listening on live stream. So.
Can you state your name and your company, please, as well?
Sure. Great presentation, Evan and Eric. Thank you. It's Robert Levin of Emerging Star Digital DeFi. It's a crypto fund. It's launching next month, and I'm interested to find out, is there an ISO committee for standardization of smart contracts in Geneva?
So congratulations, first of all, for your company launching next month. And that's a great question. I have not heard of that, have you?
I haven't heard of it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Do you know something that we don't know, Robert?
Does anybody know the answer to that for sure?
Yeah, I have not heard of that. I mean,
Yeah, I haven't heard of an initiative like that. But
we're fairly plugged in. Doesn't mean this doesn't exist, but I haven't heard anything about that at all.
You should start one.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Name and company, please.
Sure, Brian Nielsen, chairman of GBA. When are lawyers going to learn to start programming?
Next question, please.
I started when I graduated from electrical engineering school, I wrote a lot of code. And I couldn't write a line of code now to save my life because I haven't kept current with the languages. But yeah, I mean, there are lawyers who code, and I think there's a need for more of that. You know, it's probably something that ought to be taught a little bit in law school or in undergrad, pre-law, whatever. You know, I think there's a real value in having a group of lawyers out there in the world who can, you know, if they can't write code that works, they could at least read something like the example that we put up and understand what the if-then statements are doing and how it might actually work. So I think you're right. I think there's a need for that going forward.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll just share a story with you personally. When I went to law school, I applied. I was pre-med at Morehouse, so I graduated with a science degree. And I went to Columbia Law School. Come to find out that they were, not just Columbia, but other schools of that, you know, top 10 caliber, they were trying to bring more science into the legal education. So they were actively seeking science, engineering, biology, chemistry, math majors to bring that into legal education. There's no reason why that also can't be applied in this situation with coding. Because then they come to law school with that knowledge already, and then they can incorporate it into their legal education. So please, next question.
So I saw up there you were talking about, you know, codifying some of these things into law versus just building them into the blockchain code. I'm sorry, this is Amelia Powers Gardner. I'm a Utah County Commissioner and CEO of InnoGov.
And former GBE award winner.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And as I look at that,
Like we took it back.
yeah.
She's an award winner.
Okay, so not former, prior. Sorry,
Yes.
prior.
So my question is on those smart contracts. As we look at that, you know, having been in the private sector and government, I tend to lean away from government solutions. So is there a framework where you can set it up in the governance of the blockchain regardless of what the statutory law is, especially considering that my fellow elected officials, when I start talking blockchain, they think I'm talking Bitcoin, and they don't realize that blockchain isn't Bitcoin. And so I'm wondering if we can kind of just usurp or surpass the government codifying part of it, and can that just be in the code of the blockchain, and is that solid enough?
I think that's exactly right. I think your point is well taken. And the problem with thinking that government can implement any of these rules or regulations is that what government is going to do that? What government has jurisdiction over all these transactions? And you can't answer that. There is no government that has, because these transactions happen all over the world. When you don't even know who you're transacting with in a lot of cases. You know, they could be down the street, they could be in Africa, they could be in Russia, they could be in China, they could be anywhere. And because you don't know where people are or what jurisdiction ought to apply, I think you're absolutely right. This isn't a government solution, and I think it's a blockchain developer solution. I mean, I think, you know, all these blockchains are competing for smart contract business on, you know, our gas is cheaper. We can handle 10 times as many transactions as the other guys. We ought to have some of these companies competing on the basis of
Governance.
We have an excellent, well thought out legal structure and a set of standard rules that apply if you don't code something else. And you know, and we have a standard required alternative dispute resolution, you know, global virtual arbitration or something. I mean, blockchain developers could easily do that. They make all kinds of rules about all kinds of other things about their blockchain. I think they just don't have any lawyers that are sitting there building these things, so they maybe haven't thought of that as an opportunity, but I think it is.
Sounds great. So, I mean, I guess that goes back to the previous question. When are lawyers going to start to code?
Yeah.
So I have I agree with everything Evan said. I have a slightly different perspective, and that is, in my opinion, what's needed is more education and more training, right? The more they understand this technology, what it can do, how it operates, it's not just Bitcoin, the more we're gonna, and faster we're gonna evolve to where we wanna go. And that's why training and education is my passion, because that's where you're gonna see the benefits from all the hard work and energy we put into it now. The more we train, the more we educate as a community, the faster we're gonna cross that finish line where exactly what you want to happen will happen.
I'll just put in a plug for Eric's company here. Cogent Law Group is a pretty entrepreneurial group of people, basically, and we have a very flexible structure so that people can not only be members of the law firm and participate in that, but also have other business interests and startup companies and training companies. And Eric does some fantastic training. He's a leader in training in the GBA and organized this whole day's presentations, basically. So if you need training or want to find out more about training for yourself or people in your organization, this is the guy to talk to. So plug over.
Thank you, sir.
Just to follow up on the standardization of smart contracts, the IEEE Blockchain Initiative has a IEEE Standards Association, and they are leading the blockchain initiative of the IEEE, which is obviously a global engineering organization, for standardization of smart contracts and many other processes within crypto, including payments and frameworks for DLT and applications. So I see over 70 committees for standardization in the IEEE. And then in the ISO, there's meetings continuing on standardization of smart contracts and other crypto protocols. Then the next meeting is this May online, and the following meeting is in November online for the International Standards Organization.
Excellent.
Good to know. Thanks for looking that up for us, because I think that's really useful information.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Hi, how's it going? I'm Logan from Clear Contracts. I wanted to bring up a topic that I think is important in making smart contracts smart, which is data oracles. So within smart contracts, they have this capability that we talk about to, create better supply chains and automate transactions based off data. So with data oracles being pushed into the conversation of how these smart computer programs confirm transactions, how do you guys see from a legal perspective all these different parties being responsible for their role within this smart contract?
Well, I'll take a shot at that. So, I think data oracles are, that's a function and a service that I think is essential to implementing smart contracts, because, they're built on if-then processes. So there has to be an if, an event or a trigger that happens in order to make it do anything. Data oracles or any kind of external data input that the parties can agree is reliable is a necessary function for doing those smart contract things. I mean, if you need to know, was shipping interrupted from one place to another? Is a delay legitimate? Did something get delivered? Did somebody else do something they were supposed to do? And those kinds of inputs, which among data oracles are one way of getting that kind of information. I think for a smart contract to be fully automated and fully functional, there'd have to be some agreement up front about who's a reliable source for that. And if the parties can agree that a certain data oracle that their data will be relied upon, I think it's, example would be parallel interest rates. There are certain interest rate standards or benchmarks that, if you want to write in an escalator clause in a contract to, to increase the amount of rent or something else every year. Usually you'll refer to some benchmark, like the prime rate or something. So it's a standard that everybody agrees that it's a standard, and everybody knows where they can go look it up. So, I think if you have that kind of data, that kind of trusted source, then that's going to really escalate your ability to do smart contracts.
Thank you, Evan. I have been given the sign for it's time to us to go, but thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you, the great questions. Thanks to Evan for co-presenting with me. Stay tuned for the next presentation.